as I was saying, I'm Ariella Knight, an English teacher from Boston, Massachusetts in the United States and living in Algiers since 2018. I am also the owner and general manager of the American Institute, which is an English language and cultural center here in Algiers. This program that you are participating in right now, let me go back to the intro slide. This is a collaboration between the American Institute and the U.S. Embassy Algiers. So the U.S. Embassy sponsors these free online English classes so that folks, let's say in Algiers, but as far as Tamanrasset or the other Shlef to Jijil, if I get my regions correct, Algerians at every corner of Algeria can benefit from these free English language programs. So this program is actually part of a series that we are running all year long. We already finished the first one in our series, and this is our second one. The topic is all about TOEFL. So the TOEFL exam. Today is just an overview session. We'll be talking about what is the TOEFL, who should take the TOEFL, or why should you consider taking the TOEFL, as well as an overview of the different sections so that you're prepared for our following intense online course, which will then go in detail into each section. Before we go into the actual content, though, here is some information about the series. So these courses are free, they are online, and this is what we call an intensive session. So normally we run these courses once a week or twice a week for a series of weeks, but this one we are running as an intensive. It means I will be here every single night live, like I am right now, for 6 nights. We are going to have 6 classes together. This is the overview class. Then we will have a class on every single one of the TOEFL sections. And finally, we will end with a recap and a comparison between the TOEFL and the IELTS. These classes are open to everyone. So of course, as we'll talk about in a second when we discuss who should take the TOEFL exam, it's mostly appropriate for people looking to travel or work abroad or work for multinational companies in Algeria. But anybody is welcome in the class, as we say, marhaba bikum. So let's go back here to the program. So as I already mentioned, we have 6 sessions together. Today is the overview session. We have an hour and a half to talk everything TOEFL. What is the exam? Why should I take the exam? What do I need to know about the different sections? Then we have a dedicated section to each of the different parts of the TOEFL. We are doing the review sessions or these classes in the order that the TOEFL has the sections. So we start with reading because TOEFL starts with reading. Then we move to listening, just like TOEFL moves to listening, then speaking, and then writing. So we're following the order of the exam, and we will have an hour and a half dedicated to best tips and tricks for each of those sections. The last class is going to be a recap. So talking about the highlights or the most important pieces from each section. And finally, time management, because something you'll hear me say, probably repeating this frequently, is that passing or getting a good grade on a standardized English test is not only or even not mostly about your language skills. A lot of it reflects how well you have studied for the actual test. That means that you're prepared for the amount of time each section has and you manage your time appropriately. So that's why we're dedicating some extra time to that in the last course. And I look forward to seeing you, albeit virtually, for the next few nights as we work to get you prepared to get a good score on the TOEFL test. Here we go. I have Q&A. Thelja is saying, which exam is better, IELTS or TOEFL? Well, thank you for getting us started on the actual content, Thelja. You will never hear me say one exam is better than the other, but what I will help you understand are the differences. And when you understand the differences between the two, you can make what we call an informed decision. What is the best test for you? What is the test that will make you more comfortable, where you think you will perform better, and which will showcase or work towards your strengths? So we'll be doing a big review of IELTS and TOEFL. Well, we'll actually be reviewing the comparison the whole time, but in the very last class, in the recap, that's when we'll go in depth into truly how do I choose between IELTS and TOEFL. But even today, we mentioned some small things to consider between the two of them. So today we have a few different topics on the course, Mastering the TOEFL. You will not leave today knowing what is in detail in every section, but you should have a general sense of what the test looks like. So we'll be doing an overview of the TOEFL exam in general, an overview of the different sections, a few tips to succeed, but I want you to know that every section we're going to be going over really how to master that section, because the art of passing a standardized test is understanding how you are evaluated so that you can focus on scoring points based on the rubric of the test. And finally, Q&A, but the Q&A section at the end is somewhat symbolic because I will take your questions the whole class. So actually, Munsef, I'll take your question right now. Munsef is asking, how would you compare the TOEFL to the CELTA? So actually, these are completely different tests. The CELTA is an exam to become a certified English teacher. You could compare the CELTA to the TESOL. And so maybe, Munsef, you're confusing the TESOL and the TOEFL. I know, because there's so many acronyms, it doesn't help us in understanding easily what we're talking about. But the TOEFL is a test that demonstrates your English level. Whereas the CELTA and the TESOL are tests that certify you to teach English. So they really have very little to do with each other. I had another question from, oops, let me see up here, Ahmed, but before I had a different question. Amani is asking, is the exam a necessity to work outside of Algeria? Let's go into the beginning of the question and see, because I think, beginning of the presentations, and we'll see, because I think some of these early slides are going to answer those questions. Ishaq is asking if we can take a pause to pray. Ishaq, you are welcome to take a pause and pray and come back to the class and then watch the recording, because the schedule we set for the class is from 7 to 8:30. Perhaps we should adjust the schedule moving forward, but right now we don't have any breaks worked into it. But again, this section, today's class is an overview. So if you're leaving to pray and returning, you should still be able to catch back quickly with where we are. Okay, let's go. Yep, Munsef, I think you were looking for the TESOL course. This is the TOEFL course. Yes, that's completely fine. If you were confused thinking it was TESOL, this is about a test to get yourself to have an accreditation about your English language. So I am going to attempt to release a poll. Tell me if you can see the poll, or I suppose if you can see the poll, please start answering. You should have a poll in front of you with 5 questions. Oh, ignore the 6th question. It's a mistake. You should have a poll in front of you with 5 questions. I'm going to give everyone a few minutes to please answer the questions on the poll. So you can see the first question, have you taken the TOEFL? We have 5 people in the room who have taken the TOEFL before. So congratulations, you made it through a standardized English test. That is never easy. And I'm assuming that you're here because you're interested in learning some tips and tricks to improve your score. So as you know, marhaba bikum, I say to everyone and to the 5 of you who have taken the test already. The rest of you, so that's 92%, have not taken the test. That's what I expected. Typically, people who are coming to these classes are on their journey of learning more about the test and understanding if this is an appropriate investment for you. All right, then we have number 2, which is about the IELTS. And some of you, I can see from your questions, you're already familiar with these 2 tests. You know that there is a TOEFL, you know that there's an IELTS, and you're possibly considering both of them. So I saw the questions in the chat about the differences between the TOEFL and the IELTS, and do not worry, we're going to talk about it today and in every class afterwards, because it is one of the most important questions and considerations that you should have when you're picking a test. Okay, so back to the question, we have 4 people in the room who've taken the IELTS. So 5 people who took TOEFL, 4 people who took IELTS. Also, marhaba bikum to those who took IELTS. Perhaps you're here because you're not so pleased with your IELTS score and you're wondering, is the TOEFL perhaps a test that will get better results for me? And then 93% of you have not taken the IELTS, which again is very typical for those looking to learn more about tests. So then I wanted to ask about your familiarity, because if I'm talking to a bunch of experts, then we will go straight into the nitty-gritty details. If I'm talking to those who aren't even sure what this class is about, what is TOEFL, why do we even have standardized tests, then I will provide at that point. What I see from the results here is that we have a wide range. We have people who say, I'm really not at all familiar with TOEFL, all the way to people who say, I'm fairly familiar. My familiarity is pretty good. We actually have no one who said, I'm really, really familiar. And that makes sense, because if you were really, really familiar, you might not find much value to a class about the test. So the majority of you are ranking yourselves somewhere between 1 and 3 on a familiarity scale. Okay, then we have how likely are you to take a TOEFL test? And don't worry, this answer is not locking you in. You can say, I'm not likely at all. And then perhaps after this session, you'll say, you know what? I see the value. Now I actually do want to take one. It also could happen the opposite, where you think today, I have to take it. I have to take it. If I don't take TOEFL, I'll never get the jobs I want. I'll never get to study abroad. Perhaps some of the information and advice you learned from these classes and from me might persuade you to put it on pause, or to see that TOEFL isn't actually the right step for you based on your goals. So this class is not a TOEFL promotion class. TOEFL doesn't pay me any money if you take the test or not. My goal is to equip you with the knowledge you need to see if it will help you meet your goals. Okay? I can see that I would say 50% or more of you are feeling like it's likely you'll take the TOEFL in the future. The last question, besides the 6th question, which was an accident. So the last real question, which is, which of these are you interested in? And then I listed 4 scenarios. These 4 scenarios are the most common reasons that individuals take the TOEFL test. So the first one, we have studying abroad in English. And a little over half of you said, yes, we are interested in studying abroad in English. Then we had the next one, which is working abroad in English. You'll note I say working and studying in English, not in England or in the United States or in Canada. Working abroad or studying abroad in English now can happen in so many countries. So no matter what country you're considering, if the job is in English, you may be required to take an English test, even if you want to work, for example, in Germany or in Ukraine or in Greece. You may still need an English proficiency test if you will be working in English in the office. So actually, even more of you are saying you're interested in working abroad rather than study abroad. So we have 65% of you are telling me, Ariella, I want to work abroad in a job that will require me to use English. 43% of you are saying, I'm really interested in knowing my English level. So the TOEFL test, as it provides a score across the 4 competencies of English, which we'll go over in a second, is a way of actually putting yourself on the map. You can say, I'm self-taught, I watch TV, I watch YouTube channels, I'm interacting in video games in English, but I have no idea what my actual level is. Well, if you go to any English school, they can evaluate you, but the only way to get an internationally accredited score evaluation is to take one of these tests, the TOEFL or the IELTS. The last question I asked is about working in Algeria. So knowing that all of my guests today, my wonderful online students, are in different regions in Algeria, there are multinational companies and incorporations throughout the country that will hire you to work locally. However, they will require English. So it's not simply the American embassy. It could also be companies working in the oil and gas or petroleum sector in the South. It could be international sort of logistics companies working in port cities. You will find international companies relying on the English language within Algeria, and they will also need a proof of your English abilities before they proceed. So thank you very much, everyone, for doing this poll with me. It's very helpful for me to know who is in the room with me. I should say who is in the room with me. The quote's on in, since we're in a virtual classroom. Now let's get started into our actual overview of what is TOEFL. But what is the TOEFL is my first question. So the TOEFL is a standardized test for non-native English speakers, assessing reading, listening, speaking, and writing. These are the 4 competencies that you need to master for any language that you're studying, and any international test will test all 4 of them. The TOEFL is a widely accepted test that is provided as proof of English proficiency. So when someone hires you, when someone offers you a scholarship, when someone offers you a place in a university, a lot of those offers will say, you are welcome here as long as you can prove that you have the English skill that we require. So that's likely to be universities or jobs inside of or outside of Algeria. Something very important to know that's unique to TOEFL. There are actually 2 different versions of this test. They have a paper version, which is exactly what it sounds like. I have no paper near me to show you, but it's actually sitting in a center with a pencil or a pen and writing a test, something that we would say is old-fashioned, even though this actually is still, they still offer this test around the world. And I know that if you studied in Algeria, you've taken most of your tests on paper. And guess what? So did I. I took most of my academic tests on paper. So the TOEFL actually has 2 versions of their tests. They have a paper-based test and an internet-based test. So in Algeria, you can take the test at an online center, or you can take the test in an Algerian English school here in Algiers. But regardless, if you're taking the test, I'm going to say in person in quotes, the only version they offer is the internet-based test. This sounds very technical, but if you are Googling to understand the different sections on the test, how many questions do they have? How many minutes are they? That depends on the type of test. So I want to make sure that when you do your research, you are doing the correct research. You should always be Googling the IBT, TOEFL IBT, TOEFL internet-based test. Because even if you take the test in Algiers in person, the version of the test you're taking is internet-based. So it means you're going into a language center in Hydra, you are sitting down at a computer in this language center, and the version of the test you take is the internet version. There is nowhere in Algeria that you will be taking a paper version, okay? I hope that that helps you avoid mistaking studying for the paper version. The reason I emphasize this is I've heard the story before where people say, well, it was the in-person test, so I studied for the paper-based version. In Algeria, you're only going to have internet-based test. And this course, what I'm teaching you, is also the internet-based test. I'll repeat, the reason this matters is the timing of the sections. The paper-based test is longer. You have more time. So it can be a very bad shock when you're sitting to your internet-based test. You think you have 40 minutes and you only have 30 minutes, for example. All right, so that's where I scare you about which test you're taking. Oh, I've skipped all my slides. Okay. That was at the end of the class. All right, so why take the TOEFL? What's the point? Why would I go, why would I need an assessment of my English level? And I think I already spoke to this, but here are some reasons spelled out simple. Number 1, study abroad. If you want to go to a university that the language of study is English, they will mandate proof of English. And one of the reasons that they will ask for proof, you know, because you may say to me, but Ariella, I sent them a letter of motivation in English, and I sent them recommendation letters, and I'm interacting with them in English. Okay, but these universities are inviting a student from another country, a student that they haven't met, a student that maybe has a friend writing the application for them. And then if that student, crosses the ocean, of course, I'm picturing an American university where there's an ocean. If that student crosses the ocean and they show up and they don't have the necessary English, they won't be able to participate in the program. They will fail out of the classes. The deposit or the money they spent on the university will be a waste. So the universities are really, really strict about asking for proof of language. And these tests are also highly regulated. So when you take the tests, they ask for all your personal identification, including your passport or your national ID card. So it really is a strong and official testament to your English ability. So study abroad, universities abroad, that is a big one that I hear for why people take the TOEFL. The next one is visa requirements. So this can be something that is related to study abroad. It could be related to immigration purposes. It could also be related simply to getting a visa to attend a conference or attend a fair in another country. So essentially, if you are going to travel to the United States or another English-speaking country, your justification for travel relies on language. For example, I'm going to the Facebook, Instagram Meta Fair in San Francisco to network with other English language schools, for example. And then I go to speak to the visa officer. They will say to me, we need evidence that you speak enough English to attend the fair. We want proof that you have the language capabilities to do what you say you're going to do. So any visa officer for an English-speaking country has the right and the ability to ask you to take a standardized English test, depending on your justification for travel. And it doesn't, I came up with kind of a specific odd example just to make the point that it's not always student visas that will ask for English tests. There are tourist visas, culture visas, training visas that may also ask for proof of English. The next is scholarship and grants. And so these usually have to do with universities, but not always. It can sometimes be from a nonprofit, an association, but essentially there are some grants that you will be offered that rely on your ability to speak English. And so as a condition, in order to offer you the grant, they will say, hey, here's the award for the scholarship on the condition that you can prove your English language level. We also have work opportunities. So we spoke about this briefly and we said work opportunities, and you'll notice it doesn't say abroad because, as I said before, there are work opportunities in Algeria that can also dictate or rely on these tests. But it is very common that you will need a TOEFL test or a proof of your English ability in order to accept a job offer. Teaching English. So especially for those who are looking to teach English abroad, who are non-native speakers, they will be required to have proof that you have a good English language level. And they won't accept, oh, I studied at British Council until level 12, or even at American Institute. They don't know our testing system. The only tests that are internationally accepted are the TOEFL and the IELTS exams. And the last one is personal development. So again, this goes back to the slide where I said, are you interested, or the poll where we said, are you interested in knowing more about yourself, evaluating yourself? It's not very common that I come across this as the main reason for the TOEFL, but it's a nice side benefit. So if you already have to take the TOEFL test to study abroad, it's interesting to have an opportunity to see where are my strengths and my weaknesses when I take this fully accredited standardized test where they're comparing you with learners in 160 other countries, and you can really get a sense of where you are in your English language journey and what you can work on to even reach higher levels of fluency. Great, so let us see the different sections of the TOEFL test. You can see from our images here, we're already showing you some hints about the different competencies. This is usually the part where I get the most questions. So at the end of this, there's going to be a slide with all of the competencies. I recommend you take a picture or a screenshot if you're on your computer of that slide. So we're going to start with reading. And as I said, this is the order that these competencies are tested in. So what you will find in the TOEFL test is that you do all of your reading activities at once. all of your speaking activities at once, all of your listening, all of your writing. Okay, they're not changing between a reading question, a listening question, a speaking. No, they have integrated questions, which I will come to in a second, but the main competency that's being tested won't change. So in the reading section, this is what you start with. You sit down, you've just registered, you've signed up, you've shown your passport or your ID, you're super nervous. You open the computer, the first thing that comes at you is going to be reading. You are going to read 2 academic passages with 10 multiple choice questions each. Okay, academic passage. What do I mean by this? Academic, this refers to the level of the language. Academic English is B2 level. B2 is advanced intermediate or higher. It also will likely have some technical terminology. So it could be a passage about climate change, and it will use vocabulary that is relatively advanced related to the topic of climate change. It could be an academic passage about history. Maybe it's a historical analysis of World War II, and it will use appropriate academic vocabulary to discuss this topic. Okay, so when they say an academic passage, they're talking both about the content, that it will feel like something that you would read in school or something that would be given for homework, but it's also talking about the level of the vocabulary. So in this section, you can anticipate encountering high-level vocabulary. Each passage will be followed with 10 multiple choice questions. So for those who were asking about the difference between IELTS and TOEFL, this is one of the big ones. TOEFL relies very heavily on a multiple choice. So that means you have a question and you have answers A, B, C, D. And you have to read all of the options A, B, C, D and pick which one is most appropriate for the question. You have 2 sections with 10 questions each, so a total of 20 questions. I see some comments here. Hello, Anis, welcome. Munir, we don't have a WhatsApp group. Nope, our only chat time is here in the Zoom. And I do love it. I love chatting with everyone in the Zoom, and I hope to see you. I hope to see you every night for the next 6 nights. Okay, after the reading section, we move to listening. Listening has way more input. So whereas reading only has 2 input sections, so 2 passages that you really focus on and you answer a lot of questions. Listening is different. You're actually going to have 3 academic lectures followed by questions, and then 2 conversations followed by questions. So in reality, you're going to be listening to 5 separate things. So the academic lectures, this is, for example, a university class with the professor at the front lecturing, just talking. A little bit what I'm doing now, where I talk nonstop and nobody interrupts me because your microphones aren't on. I'm smiling because in the teaching world, talking at people is not the best way. We always love to have interaction, but for online webinars, it's just not possible. But anyways, back to the test. This will be recordings of one person speaking. That's it. Not a back and forth, not more than one person, one person. Each time you hear that person speaking, you will have an opportunity to answer questions. So it's not that you listen to 3 people and you answer questions. It's you listen to one person, okay, and then you answer 6 questions afterwards. You listen to the second person, and then you answer to 6 questions afterwards. And then you listen to the third person, and then you answer the 6 questions afterwards. So they are sequential, one after the other. After you finish with the lectures, we move to conversations. So conversations are usually, well, it depends on you. I would say conversations are usually harder because you're interpreting 2 different voices, which are often, I see someone saying, I struggle with British English. You bet that in this section, they play with different accents. So there will be folks with different accents, which can make the conversations slightly harder. Some people, however, will say the conversations are easier because if you didn't quite understand what one person said, you can listen to the answer or you can listen to the response and it will catch you up, as opposed to a lecture where it's just one person. So if you miss something, you're never going to return to it. More on that in our listening evening in our class on, let's see, tonight is Monday. So in our class on Wednesday, we'll be all about listening, but that's a little teaser comparing the two sections. So you have two conversations, and again, it's sequential. You do one conversation, and then you answer 5 questions. Then you have your second conversation, and you answer 5 questions. Okay, so in total, we come up with 5 different listening exercises. Each one has questions afterwards. Next, we have our third section, which is speaking. So we have 4 speaking questions. This is you as the test taker. I'm you now. I'm on the computer. You're listening. You're reading. When you come to the speaking section, you are going to wear. You should already be wearing a headset with a microphone, and your voice will be recorded into the computer. So this is a big difference with the IELTS test, because in the IELTS exam, you schedule an exam with an in-person examiner where you are actually answering questions to a real person, a human. In the TOEFL exam, everything happens on the computer, including the spoken portion. So you are going to say or speak 4 times. There's going to be a couple of different ways that you will have prompts. These are what we call speaking prompts. Some of them may be written. They'll say, talk about, and they'll give you a familiar topic. So for example, talk about a favorite hobby, or talk about your best friend. And that prompt will be written, and you'll go ahead and speak. Another prompt might be actually listening. You listen to a conversation and they ask you to respond. Another prompt could be to read a paragraph and give your opinion. So this is when we're going to start talking about integrated. So if you remember at the beginning, I said the nice thing in TOEFL and in IELTS is that they do all of their competencies separately. You have a reading section, a listening, a speaking, and a writing. So you can prioritize or prepare for each one. You don't switch between a listening and a reading section. No, you do it all at once. However, and there is a however, in the TOEFL exam, they like to do integrated questions. An integrated question means that it's actually testing more than one skill. An example of an integrated question is in the speaking test, that they may have you listen to a question and then answer it. So technically, in this section, you're being tested on your spoken English. They're analyzing your answers. But by virtue, by the fact that they are asking a question through audio, they're also testing your listening. Do you see what I mean? Because if you don't hear the question correctly, or they use a vocabulary word you don't know, and then the answer you give is not correct. In fact, because of a listening mistake, not because of a spoken mistake. So this is one of the considerations that you should have when you look at TOEFL, because the TOEFL exam has much more integrated questioning than the IELTS exam. Not to scare you, there are positives and negatives of each, and there's no saying that an integrated question would be necessarily bad. But it can, it's something to prepare for. It is something to prepare for that. In the speaking section, you're not just responding only to written prompts, you're also understanding to audio. Okay. And last but not least, writing. Oh, oops. Writing. So the last section, which I think is logical, because for me, in any foreign language, writing is always the hardest. So I think it's nice they save it for the end. I suppose you could say, no, I want to do it at the beginning, at the end of the word. But for me, I'm always happy to end on writing, so that when I finish this super hard task, I can just walk out and leave. So you will write twice. There are 2 writing tasks. In one of them, you will read something. You will read a passage, also with academic technical language, and you will have to write a response or an analysis of the passage, depending on the question. So they will both give you a passage and then ask you a question about the passage. You need to pay attention to both. Then the second writing task is going to be to listen to a recording and write a response. So again, we have these integrated questions where they're actually testing your listening ability as well as your written response ability. I see a few questions coming in. Let's take a minute to look at them before we move on. I see folks saying that they think the listening is going to be one of the hardest. Okay. Munir says, oops, I just lost the question. Munir was saying, if I understand you, right? Okay, Munir says, when I understand you well now, is this evidence of a good understanding of the language or not? Well, Munir, I will tell you one thing that is positive and optimistic, and one which is maybe less so. So yes, if you're understanding me now, then you should feel very good about your English level. You can understand someone talk about a complex topic in an organized manner and using a relatively moderate difficulty of vocabulary. So that is the good news. For me, for the less good news, the level of speaking that you will hear in the TOEFL test will be harder than how I am speaking now. Because for me, the goal of these classes is not to improve your English. I want the goal of this class to be to help you pass the TOEFL. So I'm making sure that even if your English is below a B2 level, that you can still participate in the class. You can still understand me. It's a long way of saying my English level, the level I'm speaking at, is lower than what you will find in the exam. And Rudy, you're telling me I speak fast. Sometimes I speak faster. Sometimes when I remember, I slow myself down. But the level that you'll hear in the TOEFL exam is going to be slightly faster, slightly more intonated. So in a conversation, intonation is about when we talk up and then we go down and the volume gets louder and it gets quieter, and that more natural tone. Instead of right now, I'm giving a presentation, my tone is relatively even and I'm really giving a good emphasis. So you should feel very good if you can understand what I'm saying, and you should push yourself to get to a higher level where you can understand someone speaking faster and speaking at a more challenging rate. All right, I also see everyone wanting to make a WhatsApp group for TOEFL studying. I think that's great. I encourage everyone who's going to study, whether it's for the TOEFL or the IELTS, to create a support network. These tests are challenging. They take a lot of energy, they take time. Anything where we're putting in, outside of school, outside of work, outside of family, and we're putting that much focus and effort, it's stressful. And sometimes our families don't necessarily understand, or even if they understand, they don't have the skills to help us. They don't speak English at that level, or they're not familiar with the test. So I recommend, whether it's through this group or with friends, that you find other people who have taken the test or are considering the test, and they can give you advice and emotional support and the courage to get through it. Okay, now I see so many comments coming in. The reading part, okay. I'm looking between the WhatsApp chat to find the comments. Nor is saying the reading part is the hardest. All right, I might just be losing it. Oh yeah, Nor says the reading part tends to be the most challenging for me as I don't know what to focus on. Absolutely. Nor, this is a really good point. Even though we might think that reading is simple, just wait until someone asks you a confusing multiple choice question about it. It's one of the most important reasons why we need to study for the test. We don't just study English, we study the TOEFL test, because these questions are designed to trick you. They will take a sentence and they will ask a question in a way that is confusing, so that if you're not paying attention, you'll mistake, oh, they must mean, the first part of the sentence, but in fact, they're referencing the second part of the sentence. So this test-taking skill is something that I encourage everyone to work on, and it's not about working on your English. Yes, you need a foundation of English. You need to have a certain level. You need to work on your gaps and pulling all your competencies so that they're equal to each other. But that is not enough. You also need to study the test. Do a lot of sample tests, study the types of ways, common ways that they trick test takers. I don't love this. I don't love that they make it about how well you've studied the test, but that's the reality of the test, that you can really increase your score quickly by learning the tricks rather than focus on improving your English overall. I see Anis saying he's going to be doing the IELTS test soon. Very cool. Maybe you'll consider the TOEFL. If you're here at the beginning, you'll remember I'm not the advocate for the TOEFL. I don't work for them. I'm just here to help you figure out if it's the right test for you. And every night this week, we'll be comparing IELTS versus TOEFL because these are the main questions. Thelja's asking, how much time do we need to prepare for this exam? So Thelja, that is up to you. Because if you say to me, Ariella, I have a great English level, but I'm unfamiliar with the test, I would recommend a minimum of 2 weeks. 2 weeks to learn about the test. And 2 weeks, I'm assuming you're free to study every night. Every night you spend at least 1 hour, maybe 2 hours learning the tests, taking practice tests, doing practice questions, looking at YouTube, understanding time management strategies, reading experiences on blog posts, like people who went through it, what do they wish they'd done? That kind of studying, I recommend 2 weeks. But that assumes that your English is good, that you don't want to work on your English. Now, if you come to me and you say, hey, I have a B2 level in English, I have an advanced intermediate, and the university I want to go to, they require a C1. So I need to increase a whole level of English. I will tell you, first you need to study to raise your overall English level, and then you study for the test. And that is a much more time-consuming process where you'll need at least, let's say at a minimum, if you really want to boost your English level, we're talking a month intensive that you should see a difference on your test score. Now, be careful. I didn't say a month to go from B2 to C1. I'm saying if you want to see a difference on your test score based on English alone, you're going to need a month of intensive studying. So a good program, a good general recommended program is to take 3 months ahead of time. You prepare for the test and you work on your English at the same time. You do your program so that you work on it 2, 3, maybe 4 times a week, but you don't stop your life while you prepare for the test. And then by the time it comes to test taking day, you feel really confident and comfortable and familiar with the test. Okay. All right, I see Marwa saying, can someone explain the difference between the TOEFL and the IELTS? I'm totally lost. So Marwa, every day we're going to be talking about the difference between the TOEFL and the IELTS, and I will tell you why. These are 2 standardized tests. They're both widely accepted everywhere, but they are designed differently. So when you're understanding the differences between the test, it's not the general difference that matters. It's actually the different way they do the reading sections, the different way they do the listening section, the different way they do speaking, different way they do writing. That's where you want to focus your attention in order to understand what's the best test for you. So I'll give you an example. The IELTS test has an in-person examiner. The TOEFL test has a recorded speaking section. So you have to ask yourself, in what test will I perform better? Am I someone that is really nervous if I'm in front of a native British person, because the IELTS examiners are usually British? If I'm in front of them, am I going to turn bright red? If you're like me, I turn red when I'm nervous. Am I going to turn bright red and stutter and become just like blank in my brain? So the online feels more secure. So then I want to go for the TOEFL test. Or you could say, TOEFL recording into a computer feels so unnatural, and you only get 2 times to record. So what if you mess it up twice? You never get to recover it. But with an in-person examiner, you can have a little more time. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, I meant to say this other point. I mean, the in-person examiner will still cut you off. They still have a time limit, but it's much more forgiving than a computer. You can't ask the computer for an extra 10 seconds to finish your thought. So that is an example I'm giving to Marwa to understand that there's no right answer between which test is better. It's about you. I've met people who said, I never want to speak into a computer. It's the worst. And I've met people who say, I really never want to talk to an examiner. It's the worst. All right, I see great questions coming in, but I have an eye on the time, so I'm going to get through the rest of the presentation and then we'll just address your questions. Because really, that's what today is about. It's just to get us into the spirit of what is TOEFL, why do we care about it, what should we know before we begin, and then starting tomorrow, the hard work starts with actually in depth on each section. So in front of you, you should be looking at the time for each section. So you'll note that the sections are not created equal. So the reading and listening sections are by far the longest. Reading section is 35 minutes. Listening section is 36 minutes. Speaking is only 16 minutes long. And if you'll remember, you're speaking 4 questions, which you can go back and see. That means there's only 4 minutes per question in the speaking. So you might be saying, oh, phew, I thought I'd have to talk for an hour. But you may also be saying, only 4 minutes, that's too short. All right, and then the last section we have is writing. So the writing section is 29 minutes long. You could say, dear TOEFL, why not just make it an even 30 minutes? I don't know. They have their ways, their mysterious ways, and it's a 29-minute section. So the longest one by 1 minute is listening, and the shortest one by far is speaking. All right. The total time of the test is just under 2 hours long. When you factor in registration, transportation, etc., related to the testing day, you're probably going to anticipate approximately 3 hours, maybe 3.5 hours to be safe. But this is actually a very big difference from the past. The TOEFL test used to be over 3 hours long, and last summer, they cut it down to be way shorter. So for those of you who took it in the past, the 5 on the initial poll who said they took it, I'd be curious if you did the 3+ hour long one, but those who will take it in the future, rest assured you'll be taking this one that's under 2 hours long, which I think the shorter, the better. We don't need 3 hours of testing, you know, trying to use the bathroom or get your water or not having your phone. It's too much. So I'm very happy to share this great news. So now we're going to talk about costs and procedures. So this is actually the details. So not just about preparing and score, but actually what does it look like to take the test? And something you need to know, if you don't already, is that standardized tests are an investment. They are expensive and they don't last forever. So it's important that you are dedicating the investment at the time that makes sense to you. So there are 2 options for Algerians taking the test. The first option is online. Now, when I say online, I mean in your house. Online in your house, and you pay in dollars, okay? They accept credit cards in dollars. So you'll need a Visa card, or you'll need some access to a Visa card to be able to pay in dollars if you want to take it from your house. Now, if you are taking it at a center in Algeria, which is actually currently only at 1 center, the company that offers the test, the company is called ETS, they always have just 1, maybe 2 centers per country. In Algeria, the center is Intuition. This is a language school located in Sidi Yahya in Algiers. So the main difference, in person, it's 63,000 dinar. The main difference here is the cost, the currency, either paying in dollars or paying in dinar. I see some of you having reactions in the chat about the amount of money. And this is a very real consideration. These tests are not cheap. They're very expensive, and they need to be taken only when necessary for the university acceptance, for the visa, and for the job. It's paramount that if you are going to be taking the TOEFL test, that you study for it, because you don't want to have to take this more than once. Imagine if you take it and you aren't happy with your score. You really only want to take this test one time, okay? Something to keep in mind, whether you take the test in person or online, you're still taking the internet-based test, okay? So it's the same test. It's not, the difference in price is not because one is on a piece of paper that you do with pen and pencil. I know I keep pushing this point because it gets very confusing, because the in-person looks like it would be different price because it's on paper. The only difference is the currency. In-person is just using a computer at an authorized testing center, okay? I see you guys asking about the IELTS price. I can tell you IELTS is cheaper. It is about 30,000 dinar for IELTS. Procedures to take the TOEFL exam. If you are taking the test online from your house, there are a few things to consider. The first is about payment, in that you need to have a credit card or access to a credit card to pay in what we say devise, which is not English. So to pay in US dollars, I'll say, to pay in a currency other than dinar. In addition to that, you need to have an updated version of your operating system. So when you are doing the spoken section of the test, etc., they will be screen, or actually on the entire test, I believe, they are screen recording you, because they want to see if you're cheating. They want to see if you have a book open. So they want access to see you, and they install a software that also records your screen. So if you don't have an official operating system on your computer, so if it's what we call bootlegged, where you kind of downloaded it illegally, you didn't pay for it, it's super common, but it's not accepted on the TOEFL exam. And so you need to be careful when you're signing up to take the TOEFL test online, that your home computer, I'm pointing to my laptop that I'm using, that your home computer has the operating system that's necessary to have the test accepted. And I will tell you, there was a horror story that I heard where someone was almost finished with her test and had an alert pop up from TOEFL that they had detected that she didn't have the official version of Windows X, 9X, I don't know the name of the operating system, and they nullified her score and they did not reimburse her. Okay, so do not neglect the computer requirements when assessing if you can take the test at home and on your own computer. Then the in-person procedure, actually they do all of the sign up for you. So you can call Intuition, you can find their information on Instagram or online. You can call them, they complete the sign up for you. And so you just make sure that they have your passport or your national ID card, and then you come and pay in person. I have a great question here from Mohammed Amin saying, can we pay with a credit card but take the exam at the center? Yes, that's a great option. You can pay online, and when you pay online, you also book your time. So you look at the calendar, you figure out what is the time that works for you, you book your slot, and then you show up with the fees already paid. I have a question from Hadia. Is there a limit to how many times I can take the TOEFL? So Hadia, there is no limit to how many times you can take the TOEFL, but I believe, and I will have to check on this because of the recent changes, I believe there's a minimum amount of time between when you take it. So you're not permitted to take it, let's say, on Monday and then take it again on Wednesday. First, because it takes a few weeks for your scores to process. So they won't let you retake it before you have your scores. And then second, they want to make sure that if you are getting a different score, you've had a realistic amount of time between. So in the old version of the test, which I'm more familiar with, it was 3 months minimum before retake. But I will check on this. I'll get back to you before tomorrow's class, or in tomorrow's class rather. I'll answer about this latest version, the new version that they launched last summer, about how long is the duration between taking tests. All right, Ismahan asking a great question. The test certificate will be eligible for 2 years. And that is coming up on my next slide about TOEFL versus IELTS. So you'll see that on this slide, I asked the question, how is the TOEFL different from the IELTS? And then I put in parentheses at the bottom, broadly speaking. This is because there are so many differences. There are so many small differences. There are so many little considerations about how many times you can listen to a recording, for example, or whether they rely on multiple choice or open-ended questions, for example. So I'm not going to go into all of those differences. Those are going to come up every night in every section. What we're going to talk about tonight is, in the general sense, what are the main differences between the two? So the first thing, and Ismihan, this comes to your question. Some of these is actually a similarity. It's not a difference. So the TOEFL test and the IELTS test both have the same amount of time that your scores are valid. Your scores are valid for 2 years. So if you take the test next month, May of 2024, those scores will be accepted by universities, by visa officers, by scholarship committees, all the way until May of 2026, at which point they will not accept those scores any longer. And they will say, it's been 2 years, you have to recertify your English level. This is one of the reasons why you must be strategic. You want to take these tests very, very close to when you need the results. So if you say to me, hey, Ariella, I want to study abroad next year. So, okay, right now it is April 2024. So you want to enter university September of 2025. The best time to take those tests is going to be in 9 months from now. So we're talking January of 2025. Why? Because that means those scores will be valid when you're applying for your visa in April, in May. Also, it gives you enough time to do a retake. If you didn't like your score, you can retake the test 3 months later, and you have time to get a higher score before you attend. If you took the test now, let's say you don't get accepted to university the first cycle, you may run out of those 2 years and have to pay again. All right. Tests all 4 skills. Yes, the TOEFL and the IELTS test both test the same skills: reading, writing, listening, speaking. So don't think that if you take one of these tests, you'll escape doing your spoken part, or you'll escape doing reading analysis. Both tests test all 4 skills. Also, both tests are accepted almost everywhere. So there's really not a major difference. When people come to me and they say, okay, IELTS is a British test, this is true. So it's only going to be accepted in the UK or in former British colonies or in Canada or et cetera, I will say no. IELTS is accepted all over the world, all over the US, all over Europe, outside of Europe, in the Gulf, everywhere, almost. I can't guarantee everywhere, but I will tell you almost everywhere takes the IELTS. And that is also true for TOEFL. At this point, most places, and by places I mean universities or workplaces or government offices, they believe that both of these tests are suitable for their purposes. They have seen that these tests are valid, that they are monitored, that they are legitimate. And so almost every university you're applying to will accept either. They will tell you, okay, for an IELTS test, we need a minimum of a 6. For a TOEFL test, we want an 81, for example. So they list for you the scores that you need on each one. I will say something very quickly here, which is about a test called TOEIC. I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with TOEIC. It's also an acronym. I'll put it on the chat. TOEIC, I believe, or IEC. Oh, maybe it's IEC. Okay, and I'm not sure if I spelled it correctly because this test is not as common, but they do ask for TOEIC in France. It's one of the only tests I've heard of where they will mandate the TOEIC. Sorry, one of the only countries I've heard of where they will mandate the TOEIC test instead of TOEFL or IELTS. So from my experience, TOEFL and IELTS are almost always accepted. If you find a place that accepts TOEFL, they will also accept IELTS. And then randomly, there are some companies, largely in France, that insist on the TOEIC, which is, as someone said in the chat, a more technical or professional English test. Okay. I put here about the main difference in the speaking section because that's kind of the biggest, like, obvious difference between the tests. I don't think it's the one that you should make your decision based on, but it does really make a difference in terms of the experience of the test taker. So for the TOEFL, you're on your computer and you're speaking with a microphone. For IELTS, you're in a room with an in-person examiner. So you do your test on the computer, you complete it as normal, and then you have a separate speaking assessment in a separate room with a speaking examiner. And then the very last point is about the scores. So the scores are, I don't want to say random, but they were created by the tests themselves. So it doesn't align with the Algerian grading system 1 through 20. It doesn't align with the American grading system 1 through 100. It's its own beast, we say, its own creation that they have made. So for the TOEFL, they grade out of 120. And for the IELTS, they grade out of 1 to 9. So in terms of just your familiarity, when people are talking to you about these tests, you'll hear very different numbers. With TOEFL, the numbers are going to sound huge and really big. And with IELTS, we're talking really narrow. In general, I've never met anyone who got a 9 on the IELTS. I've never met anyone who got a 1. In general, on the IELTS, you're looking at scores between 5 to 7.5. So the range is much smaller. In TOEFL, we're generally talking anywhere from 65 to 115. That's the typical range that people are getting. All right, so really quickly, I'm just going to go over the hardest and the easiest parts of the test, but these will also be something we talk about in each section. And I should say that these are based on research. So when we go online and when we talk to people who've taken the test, this is what they tell us is the hardest for them. But this type of question is really specific to the individual because your strengths are not the same as your sister or your friend's strengths. And so different parts of the test will be harder for you. But typically speaking, the easier parts of the TOEFL exam are going to be grammar and vocabulary based questions, independent tasks, meaning they're not timed. So speaking and listening are not independent. An independent task is maybe writing a passage. The test format is considered easier than the IELTS format. We'll talk more about what does that mean, what is the format of each section shortly, but the TOEFL is considered more intuitive in terms of how they format their questions. Visually, it looks cleaner. The reading tasks in general are considered easier along with the speaking tasks, which means in the harder section, we have listening and writing. Again, you may not agree. These may not be what are easier for you, but in order for you to start to get an idea of the test and what people like about it, maybe you don't know anyone who's taken it. These are the kinds of things you might hear someone say who's taking the test. All right, then what are the things that people really don't like about the TOEFL? So understanding different accents and pronunciation, especially in the conversations, that can be super hard. Integration of skills, that's what we were talking about with those questions where they are giving you a listening question in the speaking section or a listening part in the writing section. That's a skill integration, and that can be challenging outside of the listening section that you're still going to be working on listening. Technical issues. So whenever we're talking about an internet-based test, we have to consider questions like connectivity and internet and the operating device, or if the microphone is malfunctioning. Anything that relies on technology has a risk of being victim to a tech issue. And with these types of tests, it's extremely hard to ever get a refund. So it is something to really take in mind when you consider doing it in person at the center or online. I do think that at the center, you will have more guarantee that the computers that they use have been used for the tests and won't encounter those kinds of issues. But I've known many people who've taken it at home, who recommend taking it at home, who had no technical problems, but it's something to think about. Time pressure. So as I mentioned before, the test is much shorter. That can be a good thing. And I certainly think that having a shorter test overall is better for the test taker, but it does mean that they squeezed every moment out of the sections. And so again, if you look at a speaking section that has 16 minutes and 4 questions, that's 4 minutes a question. And you don't get those minutes back, and you don't have time to reflect, and you don't have a break, and you're immediately on to the next section. Time pressure also for IELTS is always going to be number 1 on the list of challenging components. And then complex questions. In general, these tests are designed to, I don't want to say they're designed to trick you, but they're designed to really understand your real English level. So they put in a lot of small details that are easy to miss, because that is how they assess someone with a super high fluency from someone with a relatively high fluency. And then, since we're running out of time, I was gonna ask the question to see if you all were familiar with the scoring. I'm just gonna show you the scoring directly. So there are 4 sections. Every section has a maximum of 30 points, okay? That means the maximum you can get is 120, but it's very unlikely that you would ever see 120. It's much more likely that you will get a diverse spread that lands you in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 100s, the 110s. This is what an example of your score will look like. So a lot of the schools, universities abroad, they'll ask for a score of 100 or higher. That's someone who really needs a strong English speaker. So here's an example of what your results will look like. You will always get results that show you your total score, as well as the score that you got in each section. So here in this sample, someone took their test in December. They got a total score of 83. The reading section, they got 22. The listening section, 22. The speaking section, 21, and the writing section, 18. So you can see from their results that their lowest skill was writing, and the other 3 skills are largely the same. So if someone comes to me and they said, "Hi, Ariella, I want to work on my competencies to raise my TOEFL score," I would start prioritizing working with them on writing. And then when we bring the writing up to the level of the other skills, then we work on all 4 together. You can see the scores of 22 and 22. If I go back here, this puts them in the high level. So 22 is the very beginning of testing high, okay? When we're looking at reading and listening. But be careful, because when we get to speaking, in order to be tested as good or high in speaking, you need 26. So even when you get to each competencies, the scores are slightly different. Again, that doesn't matter really for you, but it may be something that the university or the job, the company is paying attention to. And some companies will also look at specific competencies, like speaking, like reading, if it's going to be writing, if you're going to be doing academics. So sometimes they will ask for a global score, but then they will also have a minimum for each section to make sure that you have to have a minimum for writing, regardless of how well you do in the others, for example. All right, here's a little bit about how to improve your score, but I see so many questions coming in. I want to just get to your questions. We'll do this slide quickly, and then I think we'll go straight to questions. So for do's, we have practice, focus on English language, pacing yourself, time management, expanding vocabulary. Something you can do that takes almost no time at all is making a pattern of looking up words that you're unfamiliar with, or downloading one of these apps that's like 1 new word a day. Just little simple ways to improve your vocabulary so that when you encounter new words on the test, you're familiar with them. On the don'ts, the biggest one is going to be to make sure you don't neglect any section. You see the scoring is designed that every section is weighted equally. It will not allow you to fail or really do badly in one section and still get a good score. You need to make sure that you prioritize everything. Don't neglect pronunciation, including your own pronunciation, as well as your ability to recognize or understand language from different accents. Don't forget to proofread in the exam so that you're not just writing or I suppose typing, sending it off. You need to read your work before you submit it. And then don't panic. So we'll talk in the last class about how to manage stress, but that's one of the biggest challenges in standardized tests is managing our own stress so that we can put our best foot forward. All right, these are some resources. I'm gonna let you, if you want to take a picture or a screenshot, this is the moment. So early on, someone said, do you have any idea where I can find practice tests, where I can look at practice questions? These are great websites. The first website is actually the official website of the company that owns and operates the test, ETS. I recommend you start there. They will give you practice, advice, and really just clear answers about the time on each section, the number of questions, the types of questions, etc. Then you have Magoosh and Test Den. Magoosh is, I think, probably the most famous test prep website, and you'll find IELTS test prep, TOEFL test prep, TOEIC test prep, any test you can think of, you'll find on Magoosh. Test Den, I'm less familiar with. It's a new one we found recently that appears to have some really good resources also. So take a picture of this. If you are getting geared up now, you're doing your studying now, these are some great online places that will help you get there for free. You do not need to pay money to access any of these test prep resources. All right, so I'm going to go to questions because I saw so many questions in the chat. For now, I'm going to stop sharing and come to your questions in the last few minutes. All right, thank you everyone for your patience. I have to filter through these the WhatsApp chat creation for questions, and I have to say I love that because I like that you are so motivated and getting prepared to take the TOEFL exam that you're instantly connecting with people who can help you. Okay. Let's get to the questions. Someone asked in the very beginning if there was a test at the end of this course. There's no test. These are free webinars to learn how to get a better score on the TOEFL exam. I'm just seeing that question now. Okay, Rosa says, I have a question. When we're doing the listening exam, are we expecting any everyday life conversation or is it quite different? It's a good question, Rosa. So I can't give you one direct answer because every time they do the test, they change the questions. They don't want someone who took the test in the morning to have, to meet the person coming in the afternoon and to whisper to them what the questions are. So we never know exactly what the questions will be about. But we do know that the entire test is using academic English. So your best guess or your best option is to prepare for more technical questions or more, I want to say, professional language use. And then you should get at least one question that's a little bit more about everyday life as well. But largely, you're going to be looking at more academic English, whether it's in the reading, the writing, the listening, or the speaking section. Someone is asking here, can you please give us sources to develop our English level? Well, what can I say? There's so many, I don't know where to start. So of course, let's imagine that you are not based in Algiers, because if you're based in Algiers, I'll tell you, come to American Institute, we have English classes. But if you're not based in Algiers, well, we actually have online English classes as well, but besides something you pay for. So I think we all know you can go to a language center, you can pay for classes. Here are my top pieces of advice for improving your level. Number one, try to inundate yourself with language. Inundate means surround, but it means more like flood your environment with English. Change your phone, the language to English. Change your computer language to English. Start watching TV shows in English only and remove the subtitles. As much as possible, force your brain to be around English, the maximum amount possible for someone living in a non-English speaking country. You're trying to imitate immersion. This will introduce a very passive style of learning where even when you're tired or you're not focused, you will still be learning. So you don't have to always dedicate an hour a week or dedicate 2 hours on the weekends. You can just passively be learning new vocabulary because your favorite TV show is in English and you're always hearing a certain word. I will also ask you to turn the subtitles off. You can leave those subtitles on and learn nothing. Turn the subtitles off. I don't care if you have to watch the episode twice, but at least do it one time, subtitles off, before you turn them back on to really get the benefit. The last thing I'll say is all the pieces of advice I've given so far are about input. So listening, reading, absorbing things in. But in order to truly improve your level, you'll also have to focus on output. That means speaking and writing. So you're going to have to find ways to speak in English. That could mean joining an English conversation club. That could mean finding English speaking partners online. That could mean making a pact with your best friend to only speak English to each other. I don't know, but you will be forced, if you want to improve your English across the board, you will be required to put yourself in position where you speak English. There's no way around it. You cannot learn the language without producing it, without speaking it. If you like video games, I really recommend those video games that you do role playing. So this is my mic. I'm imitating my microphone again. So you're talking to someone who's maybe in India or I don't know, in Hungary, and you're on the battlefield together or something. I'm not a video game player, so I don't know, but my students tell me, and I see it. I see that the students who play video games where they're speaking in English really improve. For writing, I recommend you start to write short posts, you write wherever you feel comfortable, or whether you're commenting on a YouTube video, whether you're writing in the chat here, whether you're writing on your favorite influencer on Instagram, or you're writing creative stories at home. But you need to make sure that you don't just put yourself in a position to receive language, you put yourself in a position to produce language. Okay, that was a very long answer, but I told you that, you know, at my I want to say à la base, at my origins are as an English language teacher. So I'm always ready to talk about how to improve English language overall. Let's see what else folks are asking. Thelge is saying, for listening, I can interact with the American accent, but the British accent is very fast. Is this exam usually in the British accent? So the exam has multiple accents, but it is likely to have less British than the IELTS because the IELTS is founded in the UK and the TOEFL is founded in the US. But to be safe, you want to prepare for any accent that comes at you. Mohammed is asking, do you provide trainings for teachers on how to prepare for the TOEFL? So I'm providing this free training with the US Embassy right now. This will be recorded and on YouTube. For the American Institute, we do one-on-one training for people on demand. So when they're ready to start studying for the test, they come for private courses and have training. Dua says, where can I get these intense courses, please? So of course, I'm going to tell you, come to American Institute or do our online classes, but really just make sure you find an accredited language center that does TOEFL prep courses. A lot of places will say that they can prepare you for the course, but they won't even be familiar with it. So make sure you're going somewhere that you have a trusted reference for, so you're not wasting your money and you have someone who's going to help you reach the level you need to pass the test. Hasna is asking, is there an online preparation at the American Institute? Yes, we have a full online course catalog. So anything you can do with us in person, you can do with us online too as well. Sheikh Ahmed, I have a problem with writing. What should I do? I hope I answered that. Writing is a hard one if you don't naturally have reasons to write. So you will have to create them. Maybe it's emailing a friend, maybe it's joining a chat group, maybe it's joining this WhatsApp group, but you need to find opportunities to write in order to work on your writing. Okay, guys, I'm looking at the time. We're 5 minutes after. I'll try to take a few more questions. I'm going through, still I'm way back. I'm in the questions you sent me at 8:15. Radia says, this is an out of context question, but when I'm immigrating somewhere, do I need to take the TOEFL exam if I have a master's degree in English? So Radia, it's not an out of context question at all, actually, because we were speaking earlier about why someone would want to take the TOEFL. The answer is, unfortunately, it depends. Every immigration procedure is different. So what Canada asks for will be different from what the US asks for, will be different from what the UK asks for, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In my experience, you will always, or it is more likely that you will be asked to do a standardized international test than that they will accept a master's degree. Because a lot of these immigration offices, they don't know the quality of the master's degrees of all the countries. So they'll say, you know what, khalas, we don't know if it's a good master's or a bad master's, but we know this one test and we can make everybody take it. So it is most likely that they will ask for an international test, yes. All right, let's see, maybe two more questions. Oh, thank you so much, everyone. Oh, I'm seeing your nice notes at the end. I'm so glad you liked the class. I mean, this is just an overview. I hope you are still seeing the value of this. But tomorrow is when the hard work really begins and we talk about each section. I see one really good question I'm going to talk about and then I will let you go. So Hadia says, is there a difference between the paper-based TOEFL and the internet-based TOEFL? Hadia, the answer is yes, 100%. There's different times. So for example, the reading section in person is 35 minutes and online it is 45 minutes. So you need to know which test you are taking so that you can prepare your time management correctly. But one is not more difficult than the other. They're just different timings and different orders to the questions and the types of questions. That's everything. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for taking the initiative to connect with each other in a WhatsApp group. I look forward to your questions. Tomorrow is going to be all about the reading section. I will see you here at 7 p.m. Algiers time. Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.